Yeah.
Good. I'd like to get back to water for a minute. You were in the legislature how many years ago?
Well, I left in 80.
So, you know.
It's been a long time.
Yeah. We still have the water problem.
I know.
Is there a solution?
Yeah, but it's not popular. We have to learn to live in Atlanta, in Metro, has to learn to live with less water per person. We can do that. And we have to be rational about growth. We need to, not build unless we know that there is water available for whatever we're hooking up to. I mean, the idea that we're going to ship water from Tennessee River to Atlanta is, that's not going to happen. But we can live with the Chattahoochee River, even in times of drought. If we, yes, we probably need another reservoir. I mean, I think. I mean, ultimately, those sorts of solutions are helpful.
On the Chattahoochee?
Well, somewhere, yes.
Yeah.
But Atlanta's not going to have large amounts of water coming in that it doesn't already have here in the basin. It's just not. So we have to learn how not to use so much water for our yards, for our toilets, for everything we do. And we can do that. And the other part of the equation, and I am not being true to my farmers, but the big user of water in Georgia is agriculture. And at some point, we have to talk about that. There's not an unlimited amount of water for agriculture. There's I mean, this isn't California, fortunately, but we have limits, and we've been acting like we don't. So, the
rationing.
Oh yeah, I mean, yes. Right now, there's just no process. You just draw what you want. I think I was involved in, I wasn't the principal author, but I was involved in a bill that licensed or had a process for large water users where we could at least gather information for how much they were collecting, but it doesn't limit them. It just says, we find out what's happening.
So you don't think interbasin transfer of water will work?
I just don't think it's going to happen politically. I think we need to learn to live within our means in terms of water, and I think we can. I don't think we've even scratched the surface. We haven't even passed basic things like low-flow toilets in Atlanta, in new construction. How simple is that? There are so many things you can do, but we've got to start doing that.
Then you decided not to run?
I did.
Why?
There's no simple reason, and it's very much about what was happening to me at the time. Politically, I was in a bad situation in that, I mean, in terms of the ability to run for higher office. To run for Congress, which is what I would like to have done, I was in the corner of 3 congressional districts. And I had basically 2 counties in each of them, except in one district I had 2.5. So I was just in the corner there. I wasn't in a good situation to run for Congress. In terms of statewide office, I didn't have a network of friends statewide. And to compound matters, running for anything, I was a terrible fundraiser for me. I got lucky when I ran against Martin in that I was able to do it without a lot of money. But to take the next step, to go to the next level and run for a statewide job would have required what at the time would have been an enormous amount of money for me, and I didn't have it. So I had limited resources, no real political options except stay in the Senate, and I felt then, as I do now, that you shouldn't hang around. you know, there's a time to go and a time to leave. And it was as good a time as any. And there was just in terms of my personal choices, I wanted to move out. I wanted to live somewhere else and experience something else. And I wound up accepting a job in New York with the National Audobon Society, which I did for a couple of years. I created the Birdathon, which to this day is their main fundraising venture. And I enjoyed it enormously, but then I went back in the insurance business up there.
In New York?
In New York,
Yeah.
That's what I did the whole time I was there. I was there for 27 years in New York.
City?
Living right downtown, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always had an interest in classical music. I wound up writing as a music critic for a variety of magazines. That has transferred over. When I moved here, I was able to start writing as a stringer, as a, you know, just a part-time person for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Again, almost entirely about classical music, because that's my area. I do occasionally write about the theater or something like that, but it's mostly about music.
But you decided to come back home.
I did.
Why?
Well, I had always thought that when I got old that I would probably retire down here. And I got old, probably not as old as I had been thinking I would eventually and expect to get. But the insurance company that I was and am affiliated with, it's a franchise arrangement, and we had some problems in downstate New York with hurricane risk management. We stopped writing homeowners policies. They started non-renewing in-force homeowners policies. I couldn't figure out how to make money. I was able to get a good price for my business. I sold it. I came down here. I was going to retire, travel around, concentrate on my writing. And that didn't work. I was just bored. So I went back in the insurance business, which is what I do again.
Yeah.
But, and you're right. I suppose there is a certain amount of political activism that I like to dabble in. So I'm not completely gone from the political process, but I am gone as a candidate.
Really?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Well, you know, they say never say never.
Well, I've pretty much said never.
Well, let's talk a minute about your community activities. I know you're involved in a lot of activities here in Atlanta that are not political.
It's mostly about begging. I mean, at this point, I'm mostly about asking people for money, whether it's for a charity or for a political candidate. I'm still a Democrat. I'm a yellow dog Democrat. I try to support candidates that I like, who I think have a good chance, whether that's in a statewide race, like the governor's race, or in particularly legislative races, because that's what I'm interested in, is the legislature. I don't come down here much. You know, I was just thinking, I came down here, I was having trouble figuring out where to go. I don't find the Capitol, I mean, it's just me, but to me the Capitol today is kind of a mean place. It doesn't have the convivial atmosphere that it used to have. It's just too partisan. And I regret that. We lost something when we lost the ability to sit down and talk things out and persuade each other. That's what it really was like when I was here. But those are the kind of things I get involved in, whether it's you know, something to do with, I don't know, the Grady High School Orchestra or my Rotary Club, or project that my Rotary Club sponsors for furthering, partners with Aid Atlanta to further AIDS awareness in the schools, in Atlanta public schools, those kinds of things. I do some hands-on stuff, but it's mostly about begging for money.
Let's talk for a minute about the Democratic Party.
You want to give me some money, I'll talk to you about that. About the Democratic Party?
What happened to the Democratic Party in Georgia?
Well, I think the Democratic Party, for a real long time, was just the umbrella for all serious political organization. There wasn't a counterweight. And there were people in the Democratic Party who certainly were more conservative than the Republicans I mentioned, like Coverdell and Bob Bell. Those would have passed as liberals compared to some of my Democratic colleagues. More so in the House, I think. But I think that an era passed, and Georgia became a part of the two-party system, I guess, and at the same time, the parties developed more of a partisan aspect than they might have elsewhere. Some of this had to do with timing. I've never met Newt Gingrich, or if I have, I don't remember it. It's possible. I mean, you go to a lot of receptions when you're in the legislature. I probably met him at some point because he would have been a congressman, but I don't remember it. But I've told people, two of my people that I most admired are people that he ran against, and in each time it was almost a new low in political campaigning. The first was Jack Flint, who was the father of one of my college roommates. And I think he ran against Jack first as a Democrat, running to the left of Jack, and didn't win, so then he ran against him on the right. And I don't remember if it was the second time or the third time, but Jack decided, having experienced one campaign with Gingrich, that he didn't want to put his family through what he knew was coming. Not that he had anything to hide, he just wasn't worth it. So he withdrew. And then Virginia Shafford, who was my colleague, sat 2 rows behind me, a good friend, ran as the Democrat in that race. And I suppose by modern standards, even that race was pretty tame, but at the time it was a defining mean race with the suggestion that she was abandoning her children to go to Washington, that sort of thing. It was just nonsense personal stuff. Those kind of things came into play. But I think also, though, politics has, and this is not about your question, but this is about what's happened to politics. I just think we live in an age where, everybody used to read the same paper. They used to read the Atlanta paper. Maybe if you were in Macon, you read the Macon paper, and you read Selby McCash and all those people. But that was what we did, and that was where you got your news. Now, we've got these bloggers who are partisan and personal and mean-spirited. And there's a take no prisoners approach in the press. That is the press. Because for one thing, we have lost a statewide press. The Atlanta paper barely covers the Capitol at all, and aren't that interested in a comprehensive look because they can't afford it. They don't have the money. And there's no one to take their place. So it's not, what's taken their place is a patchwork of bloggers. And that can be anybody. It can be a conspiracy theorist. It can be someone who is brilliant. But a lot of people tend to read the one that agrees with them, and that drives them further into the corner, I think.
Would you agree that the present political philosophy in Georgia is the old Democratic philosophy that has turned Republican?
No, I don't agree with that. I think, I don't know that there was a Democratic philosophy. It was just a big tent that included a lot of people, including I mean, Lester Maddox, Herman Talmadge, you know, right on through the most liberal Democrats from Midtown Atlanta. And I should say, I should talk about Lester Maddox a minute, because I think Lester I mean, the thing I'm most capable of talking to you about is what happened back then, because that's when I was more of a player. I'm just an observer now, and who cares about what I think? But I think Lester is an interesting and complicated, in some ways, and often misunderstood character. I would make the argument, I guess I'm making it, that Lester was the most liberal governor Georgia has had since Ellis Arnold, and I am including Jimmy Carter in that, and Carl Sanders in that list. Lester Maddox, part of this was because of timing. He was governor during the Johnson years, and there was just a lot of money, and things were happening. Regardless of the reason, I mean, Lester was an innocent, extremely naive man who arrived here with no idea how to run a complex office. And, you know, when that happens, people will find you who have pretty good ideas. He had the reputation for agreeing with the last person he talked to, and so if you were smart, you knew you want to wait till everybody else has come out and then go in and give him your opinion. And of course, you know, Zell Miller was I guess his press secretary. Zell had some position, I don't remember.
Yeah, he was his executive secretary.
His executive secretary. So, but those people that I worked with in the Senate, so, you know, that I've just described to you, were Culver and Zell back then were the guys feeding Zell's ears, I mean, feeding Lester his opinions on day-to-day issues. But he had a heart, and he had a compassion for poor people, because he'd come from a very poor background. And he used to have Little People's Day when he would open, what was it, Saturday or Friday? I don't remember. I think it was Friday.
Wednesday afternoon.
And anyone who wanted to could line up and go and talk to the governor about anything, whatever their problem was. And he would have his department heads there, and he would hand stuff off to them. And they would get their problems solved. It was wildly popular. He took the stripes off the prison uniforms, which was very popular among black people. He said things that were not politic, but you have to go by what he did and what happened in terms of spending for poor people and for nutrition. And that was an era when a lot happened. Now, I dealt with him off and on from long before I got elected, until when I was elected, he was just a phantom that would show up at the Capitol. I will tell you my favorite Lester Maddox story. Years after I had left office, when they remodeled the Capitol, I'm pointing at the wrong direction, they're over there. They remodeled the Senate chamber, and after that, the Senate sponsored a party for all former members of the Senate and former lieutenant governors, because they were the presiding officers, and really no one else except, you know, of course Coca-Cola paid for it, so they were there. But we had a party reception in the Capitol, in the Senate chamber and the rotunda, and it was a black tie. And my niece, who was, I was living in New York, I came down and I took my niece, who was probably 16 or 17 at the time, all dressed up. I was trying to introduce her to all of these, you know, famous people, George Smith, and, you know, people that she didn't really recognize the name, but I tried to explain. I introduced her to Lester Maddox. And you know one thing about Lester, he could never remember anybody's name. He had absolutely no memory. And I knew that, so I told him who I was, and he remembered. And then he asked me if I was related there used to be a chiropractor named Paulk I think in Marietta. Everybody went to him. He must have had a huge practice, because back before there was Earl Paulk Jr. and Earl Paulk Sr., there was the chiropractor. That was, you know, I can date how old people are by what they ask me when they hear the name Paulk. And people would always ask me if I knew this guy. And I said, well, he's related, but it's pretty distant. And he said, I had a digestive problem. And people kept saying, go see Paulk, go see Paulk. So finally I went to see him, and he gave me an adjustment. I went home. I had the first good BM I'd had in 6 weeks. One adjustment. What could I say? I thought a minute and I said, Lester, that's great. And my niece was standing there with her mouth open, trying to figure out who this guy was. So there you have it. What can you say?
It's been very delightful.
Thank you. It was fun.
Is there anything we've forgotten?
I'm sure there are.
Or left out?
I forget a lot. But I think we've covered some main things. I'm glad. It sounds good to me.
Well, we're delighted to have had you. And I want to thank you on behalf of the Richard Russell Library and Young Harris College, and invite you to come back if you so desire.
All right. If I think of some new things, I'll call you up.
Good.
Thank you. Thank you.